Legend Total War here, and today we're doing another tier list using Tier Maker, this time covering a batch of Regiment of Renown from the High Elves, the Dark Elves, and the Lizardmen. The way we're going to be comparing them is based to their original counterpart, and whether or not they are better or worse, and by how much, than those units. Now, before we get started on the actual tier list, I do need to let you guys know that this video here is sponsored by Instant Gaming. So, I've been using Instant Gaming for ages. I've plugged them heaps of times. But what I like to do with these sort of sponsorships is go in and have a look at games that I play and see if I can find some really good deals. So today's spotlight, I suppose, is on Stellaris. So I found it here, the Galaxy Edition, for $4. Now, I don't ever cover Stellaris on this channel, but just to let you guys know, I have played over 1,000 hours on Stellaris. I absolutely love it. But yeah. If you want to get the game for $4, it doesn't have that much of an intrusive DLC policy like other Paradox games. You can get the DLC if you want, but you are not forced to get it, in my opinion. But yeah, getting the base game for $4 is, I think, an absolute steal. So go and check out Instant Gaming if you're interested in that deal. Alright, now, onto the tier list itself. I've got the game open over here so we can test out look at the various stats of the units. Starting with the Herald of Mathlan over here. Also, just as a little side note, I do recognize that occasionally I do miss out on some of these information, namely the Sterling's Revenge from last week. I don't know how I missed the armor piercing there, but you guys were very quick to point that out, and thanks for that, because it was definitely lower rated than what... Sorry, I rated it lower than I should have, so it would have... If I recall, I put it under slightly better, but it should have been under better than original. So I just wanted to make that sort of adjustment there in recognition that I did make a mistake there. Okay, so let's have a look here. So that being said, if I do make a mistake in any of these units, feel free to post it in the comments below, so I can correct my mistake in the next one. Okay, so let's have a look. Science of Mathlan. If I recall, the big difference here was this ability, the Aura of Protection. Providing a 10% damage resistance in an area as long as you've got more than 50% of your mana. Now, what that means is having at least 15 magics available to use, not in reserve. And it doesn't matter what your reserves are, as long as your pool of available magic is above 15, then that will apply. So if we have a look in terms of absolute stats, they are identical, except for this one here has defense versus large, and this one here is just expert charge defense. So that's the big difference here. Magical defense and expert charge defense. So it protects against infantry charges as well. In terms of actual combat stats, bonus versus large 15, bonus versus large 15. Identical combat stats. So this would be a good unit to keep your heroes around, because 10% damage resistance isn't that big of a deal for regular units, especially when you're dealing with high damage units. For example, if you're going up against a Carnosaur, as an example, Carnosaurs will usually overkill the units that they're infantry that they're fighting, so 10% damage resistance isn't really going to make that big a difference. But on heroes that, generally speaking, can't be overkilled, and what I mean by overkilled is, let's just say an entity has 50 hit points, and then something hits it for 400 damage, it doesn't matter how much damage resistance it has, unless it's in the 90s. It's not going to be able to repel the attack, whereas single entities basically can't be one shot killed, so that's where that comes in handy. So really useful around high health entities. Okay, so where are we going to put that? That's a fairly useful ability, but I'm only going to put that as slightly better than the original. It's just not that big of a deal, really. Okay, then we've got the what are they called? The Pure Main, is that right? The Pure Main Company. Yep. So that is a white line of Crace. So we need to put in the extra experience so they're at parity there, because sometimes there are combat differences between the two. Alright, if we have a look here, this one here has Sundered Armor and Guardian. So this is another unit that would be good to keep near a hero. Now, those two abilities there actually stack. So if you have the Sons of Mathlan and the Pure Main Company near a hero, you'll get that 15% physical resistance and that 10% damage resistance, so that's fairly good. But in terms of actual combat stats, that's not that big of a deal. Sundered Armor is definitely useful for sure, but it is mostly armor piercing. And typically speaking, your infantry shouldn't be like having 3 units attacking once, so it reducing the armor for non-armor piercing units is not that big of a deal. Of course, reducing the armor does also help with its base damage, but not by a significant amount. So I don't think its actual combat stats are that big of a deal, so I'm going to put that one there as just slightly better than the original. It's not that big of a deal. Okay, next up, let me see. Next up, we've got the Phoenix Guard one. What is that called? That is called the Keepers of the Flame, which is a Phoenix Guard. And let's have a look at that one. Have a look at the differences. So, it's got magical attack, which in Warhammer 2 is actually a detriment in some cases. So, it'll bypass physical attack, but in... So, this will be a unit that'll be more useful in Warhammer 3, because it'll be less easy to be bypassed. What does this Mark of Asurian mean? So, it's got 30% damage resistance, which is the same as that one. But its combat stats are exactly the same. So what does this mean? Right, so they're unworthy... Okay, so when they die, apparently they inflict some damage onto their opponent, which is difficult to get from these stats over here. So I guess that's good, because these ones here, they will definitely die in combat. You know, they're not invincible by any means. I guess that's okay, but it's kind of like having abilities that dish out damage or provide some benefit when you're losing, those kind of suck. So the real benefit here is just magical attack, which is okay. It's really difficult to justify that one as even slightly better than the original, especially in Warhammer 2. I've really got to put that down as kind of worse than the original, because in Warhammer 2, you are far more likely to encounter something with magic resistance than physical resistance. And so, in many cases, this unit here might actually be detrimental over a regular Phoenix Guard. And then, the fact that it dishes out damage to those that kill it, I can't really value that particularly highly. That's a Tretch level skill. I just don't value losing loser abilities that are highly, if that makes sense. So I'm going to put that one as worse the original. In Warhammer 3, though, it will be different, because magic attacks is definitely a superior mode of attack over physical attack. But in Warhammer 2, which is what I'm basing this on at the moment, that's definitely not a good thing. So it's only slightly worse, not like a big deal, but I'm going to put that as worse. Okay, after that we've got some archer units. We've got the Talons of Torquelada, which is a archer with light armor. Okay, so let's have a look at it here. So it does 2 additional missile strength. Let's have a little bit of a breakdown. So 18 and 3 compared to 16 and 3. So it does 2 extra base missile damage. Same range. They've got flame attack, but they're also able to reduce the fire weakness of the increase fire weakness, I suppose, of the enemy. So that's particularly useful. Now, generally speaking, there are a lot of units in the game that actually have fire resistance. So having fire attack doesn't mean anything unless something has either a resistance or a weakness to it. But because it makes sure that whatever it shoot at, it basically gets a 20% damage boost to it. That's very useful. And because the High Elves do have a lot of units that dish out fire attacks, namely like Sisters of Avalon, as an example, having this unit matched in a bunch of Sisters of Avalon can increase all the Sisters of Avalon damage by 20%. So this is actually a far superior unit because it really fits in well with the High Elves. So this one here is far superior to the original. Really good Regiment of Renown because it just fits the faction really well. Okay, then we've got a Bothan Sea Guard one, the Storm Riders. Let's have a look at that one. So, in terms of stats, it has 1 extra missile strength, but that might just be due to reload time. So, 15 and 4. Or, yeah, it's the same damage, it's just reload time reduction. So, it has Vanguard deployment, which on its own is not really that useful. It can also fire while moving. That is actually quite good. Which is kind of makes them like a huntsman, because they don't fire in a 360-degree range. So it can be good at running down units. It also has fear, which is good because that makes it immune to fear, so it won't rout so easily. So having this one at the front line can be quite useful against scary units like dinosaurs or whatever, so it doesn't rout. But apart from that, that's about it. That's definitely good. It's an upgrade and can be very useful, because Loth and Seaguard do have good combat stats. I'm going to put this one here as better than the original. I can see a lot of practical application for all of its various abilities there. So that's a pretty decent improvement. Okay, then we've got the Grey, I think they're called. Yep, the Grey, Shadow Warriors. Let's have a look at that one. So this one here has got Snipe, so that means while it's shooting, it remains hidden. You still have to stay at a distance. And it also has this ability here, which it already stalks in the first place, but it gives it Unspottable. Now, Unspottable is a bit of a weird one, because you can be spotted with Unspottable, but you have to get right up in their face in order for that to happen. Also, if you trigger this while you're already discovered, it won't make you Unspottable. You have to stalk first, and then you become Unspottable, so that can be a little bit iffy. But having the extra 25% speed can be very useful if you're using this sort of unit in amongst other Shadow Warriors. It could just sort of get ahead of them and get away from dangerous opponents. It's not that big of a deal, and if you can see here, their combat stats don't seem to be any different. If we have a look, it's probably the same damage output, it's just faster reload time. Yeah. So that's slightly better than the original, I'd say. Like, Snipe is useful for sure, but I wouldn't value it that highly unless it has extremely long range. Which, it does have long range, but just not extreme long range. Okay, then we've got the Sisters of Avalon one here. Whoops. Okay, so let's have a look at the difference here. So this one here, by default, has the Banner of Avalon. So it provides improved power recharge rate and increased power reserves. That's very good, for as long as you've got a magic user. And its missile strength also seems higher, and it's also got Encourage, which provides a leadership buff. That's not that big of a deal for High Elves. They've usually got pretty good leadership in the first place. And usually enough leadership, like other heroes already providing that, and doesn't stack. So let's have a look at the missile strength. 14 and 8. And 14, sorry, what was that? Yeah, 14 and 18, sorry, not 14 and 8. And it looks like it's the same damage, it's just a pretty decent reload time reduction by 0.4 seconds. So it really comes down to the Banner of Avalon there, which, that's definitely good, having extra, like, that's essentially an arcane conduit that's always going off. So, like a greater arcane conduit. So as long as you've got a wizard in the army, that is definitely better than the original. But if you don't have a wizard in the army, then that's fucking useless. So you need to have a wizard in the army if you want to make use of that. Okay, then we've got, I think that's the Herald of the Wind. The Illyrian Reaver Archers. Yep. So, let's have a look at the difference here. Big increase to combat stats here. So, if we have a look at it, we've got 15 extra speed, which I value that very highly on a Horse Archer unit. That's very good. It's got 2 extra melee defense. That's okay. Extra charge bonus. That's good. And extra missile strength. Now, let's have a look at that missile strength and find out if it's just reload time reduction. So, 16 and 3. And 16 and 3. Yeah, so it's just reload time reduction. Now, on this unit here, does having extra combat stats make a difference, right? Now, because I rated the Huntsman unit lower because it actually had higher combat stats. Now, with a Horse Archer unit, this is a unit that you can use in combat. Once it's run out of ammunition, because they tend not to have that much, you do need to kind of use them to hit and run other units. So having a bit of extra speed, extra melee defense, extra charge bonus will actually be quite useful. You should only be using it to charge into light opponents. But the reason why I would value melee over this on this one as opposed to the Huntsman is because this unit can pick and choose its targets. You know, if there's a unit of Chosen chasing after you, you don't have to engage with it. If there's a unit of Chaos Knights charging after you, you don't have to engage with it. If there's a unit of enemy, marauders that are just about smashed to shit, then you can decide you want to hit that. Whereas the Huntsman, being a small, like a slower unit, it can't often dictate what units catch up to it because it doesn't have that speed. But with 105 speed, it can outrun just about everything. So where am I going to put that? I'm going to put that unit as better than the original. Okay, then we've got the Dragonborn. Is that what they're called? No, the Fireborn. We're not playing Skyrim. The Fireborn. So let's have a look at this one. So this one here dishes out fire attack, which can be a weakness, but it also has bonus versus large. Now, one of the main reasons why I've always hated on Dragon Princes is because they're a tier 5 unit, and they don't have, like, a majority armor piercing. They're fairly quick, but they've just got all-round good stats, but they don't have, like, a speciality. And generally speaking, with cavalry, it's good to be either anti-infantry or anti-large. So the thing I like about the Fireborn is that they do actually have a speciality. They've got anti-large, and a pretty significant one of that, bonus versus large plus 18. That means in a cavalry charge, like cavalry versus cavalry charge, you can get the upper hand with this, unless you're going up against like Grail Knights or something like that. That might be a bit of a struggle. The only thing you have to watch out for is whether or not they have fire resistance, but being a quick unit, you can just pick and choose your target. So this unit here is actually far superior to the regular Dragon Princes. You just have to be mindful of flaming attacks, that's all. So, I wouldn't put it far superior, I'll just put it as better than the original. I very highly rate bonus versus large. So what bonus versus large does, it gives you extra melee attack and weapon strength. So they hit harder and they hit more often. See, one of the things with cavalry is that they tend to have very low melee attack. That's because you're supposed to be relying very heavily on the charge bonus, which they have a very high charge bonus. But oftentimes your units will just get stuck, and so they need to have that extra stats in there to prolong the fight and do as much damage as possible. Okay, then we've got the Rahagra's Pride, which is a Warlion unit. So let's have a look at the difference here. In terms of combat stat, these seem identical. It's just this one here has the Mighty Roar. So just checking the bonus versus infantry. Yep, 10 versus, is it the same? Yep, 10. So combat stats the same, it's just about this roar here, which reduces leadership by 8 and reduces their speed. That can be very useful, especially if you're not playing on very hard battle difficulty, where it's a lot easier to rout the enemy. But using this unit here in a pinch situation where you've just about routed the enemy, and you pop down this ability, that can be very helpful. So definitely value that a bit, but only like slightly better than the original. Just slightly there. And then finally for the High Elves, we've got the Omen of Asurion, which is a Arcane Phoenix. So let's have a look at the difference here. So this one's got this ability here, Omen of Hope, which provides immunity to psychology in an area. I don't value that very highly at all, because that means you've got to keep it near your troops. And typically speaking, Phoenixes should be harassing constantly, which means they're not providing support. This is not a support unit. This is a fucking harassment unit. It needs to go out there and kill heroes, like harass archers, that kind of stuff, popping down its bombs. This is not something that you need to prioritize at all. So that's not very useful. And is that it? It seems like it. That's it. It just has that ability there. So I would say with that, it's not detrimental. It's not detrimental, it's the same as the original. It's just not a useful ability. I think this is a really good Regiment of Renown. Don't get me wrong, this has saved my ass a lot of times. But that's because Arcane Phoenixes are just really good units in general. This unit here is just no better than another Arcane Phoenix, because the ability that it provides, I just don't think that you should prioritize using it. These are so much better off away from your main forces and doing other things. And if you're using a bunch of Phoenixes, then Phoenixes are already immune to psychology, for the most part, apart from Terror. So it's just not that valuable. So I'm going to put it as the same as the original. Alright, now we move on to Dark Elves. And we start with the Helebroni, which are Dread Spears. So what's the difference between these two? Okay, the Helebroni has Poison Attack, which is good. Especially considering this is a unit that needs to hold the line for as long as possible for your Dark Shards or whatever. So reducing damage being done to it is good. And then it seems like it has Expert Charge Defense as opposed to regular Charge Defense versus Large. So that's good. It'll negate the charge of infantry and dish out Poison Attack. In terms of its actual weapon strength, bonus versus Large 14 compared to 14. We always have to check that because that's hidden value. You gotta go check the actual stat. So that's like slightly better than original. Not a big deal. It's better than nothing, but yeah, just slightly better. Okay, then we've got these Witch Elves here. The Sisters of Singing Doom. Whoops. So let's have a look at the difference here. In terms of combat stats, exactly the same. Although these here cause Fear and Terror. Which that's useful, I guess, when routing other units. But that's about it. Unless their physical resistance is different. Doesn't look like it. What about their weapon strength? 8 and 8 bonus versus infantry. They both have Murderous Mastery, and they both have Frenzy. So it really just comes down to Fear and Terror. Okay, so with that, that also makes them immune to Fear and Terror, so they're more likely to hold their position a lot longer against scary units. That makes them reasonably good at breaking low-tier infantry. This is an okay ability to have for it. Yeah, it's okay. Nothing spectacular, but I'm going to put that as just slightly better than the original. Most of the time, you're not really going to notice that, I think. Okay, then we've got the Harbinger Executioner Regiment of Renown, this one here. The Blades of the Blood Queen. Alright, let's have a look at the difference. Okay, seems identical in terms of combat stats, but it has Frenzy and it has Guardian. So keeping your heroes near it could be useful. And then it's just going to be a better fighter. This is a high leadership unit, so having Frenzy, it will likely be active most of the time. It will fight better than its other counterpart. Not by a huge degree, so bonus first infantry 14, bonus first infantry 14. Yeah, it's very rare that there's a significant difference in those bonuses, but we should check anyway. So again, this one here is just slightly better than the original. Having regular units with Guardian is not that big of a deal, because typically speaking, your heroes don't always fight near infantry. They're usually fighting, it depends on how you use them, fighting like ahead of your units, or doing something else, so it just depends on how you use it. But the Frenzy will definitely come in handy. I'm going to put that as slightly better than the original. I don't value that stuff that highly there. Okay, then we've got the Dark Shard unit. It's the Bolt Fiends, which is a Dark Shard with shields. Let's have a look at the difference here. Okay, so it has immediately 20% extra range. That's already going to give it big points with me. Missile units, you want to have as high range as possible. And that means its base range is higher than this. And because the Dark Elves and their tech tree can increase their range by a fair bit, this one here is going to have significantly more than 20 range bonus over the regular Dark Shards once you've researched that. Then it's also got Shield Breaker. So that's definitely good because, you don't want to be shooting into shields. And it seems like it's got reload time reduction. 9.8 seconds compared to, 10.4 seconds. I imagine it's the same damage. 3 and 11. And 3 and 11, yeah, with number of projectiles too. Okay, so yeah, the big difference with this one is range and shield breaker, which is very useful for regular archer units. Because, yeah, you don't want to be shooting shields. Don't have your missiles blocked. So I'm going to put this one here as... Ooh... I'm going to put it as far superior to the original. It is a really good unit, that one. That's a big upgrade. I almost put it under better than the original, but I think the shield breaker and the extra range really puts it a step above, better than original. Okay, next up we've got the Doomfire Warlock Regiment of Renown, which is called the Slanesh's Harvesters. I can't remember the name of every single Regiment of Renown. Too many of them. Okay, so this one here, what's the difference? I think it really comes down to the spells being used. In terms of its combat stats, it's identical. So, the regular Doomfire Warlock casts 2 Soul Blights and 2 Lesser Doom Bolts. The Slanesh's Harvesters casts 2 Words of Pain and 1 Soul Stealer. Okay, now Soul Stealer is good if you're casting into a big blob with lots of units, right? And especially good if there's single entities in there, because it does a decent amount of damage to single entities, which it's very rare to have a spell that's good against that. So that is probably better than 2, what are they called again? Lesser Doom Bolts. And Soul Blight, that's an area of effect ability, whereas this one here only affects 1 unit. So this is a bit of a weird situation with these two, because it comes down to the various situations. Like, none of these spells are bad. It's just that there are some situations where Lesser Doom Bolt is better, and there are some situations where Soul Stealer would be better. So in that case there, I'm just going to put that as same as the original. It's not like they've got better spells, they just have a different spell set. Good spells by all means, but all 4 of those spells are useful in pretty much every battle that you fight. Okay, then we've got, I think that's Knights of the Ebon Claw. Is that right? Knights of Ebon Claw, yep. And these are Cold One Dread Knights. Let's have a look at the difference between these two. Okay, big advantage here is that it doesn't have Rampage. I hate Primal Instincts so much with Rampage, so I would value that a whole lot more. One of the reasons why I've always taken a big shit on Cold One units is because they Rampage. There's nothing worse than having your cavalry unit charge in and then you're being unable to pull them out because they Rampage, because you need to cycle charge with cavalry. It's absolutely essential. Staying in prolonged combat is a great way to have them killed. There is one disadvantage though, because Primal Instincts does increase their stats when it activates, but I would much rather not get that +8 melee attack and 15% charge bonus and actually have control over my cavalry unit. So, you know, that ability can get fucked. It also has Murderous Mastery as opposed to Murderous Prowess, which is a slightly a better version of Murderous Prowess. Of course, it only activates 1 point during the battle, so I don't value it that highly. And apart from that, it is exactly the same. But yeah, just not having the Primal Instincts, I think, is definitely a plus. So I'm going to put that as slightly better than the original. Still don't really like Cold One units that much, just because of their low speed and just poor results usually. Okay, then we've got... Oh, hang on, what comes next? We've got... Oh, this one here. Right. Juicy topic. Okay, we've got the Raven's Herald. Now, what unit is this a Regiment of Renown of? It is actually the Dark Rider Repeater Crossbow, right? So this one here, it's a bit of a weird thing because this is a flying unit that has 24 entities as opposed to a horse unit that has 60 entities. But yeah, this is the Regiment of Renown version of it. Obviously, there are some tweaks to it. Now, there's a lot of things to talk about here. It has lower health, lower entity numbers, which means it's not going to shoot as many projectiles, but its projectile strength is double. But it doesn't have double the number of entities, so it actually has less damage output than Dark Rider Repeater crossbows. It has 1 extra melee attack and 13 extra speed. It's also unable to hide. This unit here can be quite useful, but in terms of like a straight up skirmish, it will lose to its regular counterpart 9 times out of 10. Because, you know, it can't fire while moving, it doesn't fire in a 360-degree angle, it doesn't have a lot of ammunition. Just about any single skirmish unit in the game can shoot this fucking idiot out of the sky. So Raven's Heralds are only useful if the enemy has absolutely no ability to counteract them. So they have no flying units because they lose in every flying engagement, and the enemy has no like missile units because they lose in every single skirmish. If the enemy has skink, like just regular skinks with javelins, you can't keep the Raven's Herald anywhere near them. They'll just get shot out of the sky. So this one here is a weird one because most of the time it is worse than the original. But if you have an opportunity where the enemy has no missile units and no flyers, so for example you're going up against Warriors of Chaos, then it can actually be far superior to the original. But 9 times out of 10, this is such a disappointing unit, and you just don't really want to recruit it unless it's an emergency. So, bit of a weird one with that. It is both worse and far superior to the original at the same time. Okay, so next up is the Recast Ragers, which is a Scourge Runner Chariot. And let's have a look at the difference here. It actually has lower missile strength than its counterpart, but it also has this here, Barbed Net. So anything that comes within 40 meters of it, it'll have reduced missile resistance and speed. Of course, getting that close to a unit is not ideal for a chariot, but if you really want to make use of that 10% missile resistance reduction, that can be quite useful. It also helps it to get away from fights. Now, I really do like this Scourge Runner Chariot, and they're a really good unit because they've got good high speed, and they're anti-infantry and anti-large at the same time. Now, let's have a look at the things that make it different to a regular Scourge Runner Chariot. Let's firstly look at the damage output that it does. So, base damage 12, armor piercing 40, with 40 bonus versus large, shots per volley 2. Then this one here, 12, 40, 40. Reload time seems to be a lot slower. Yeah, their reload time is a lot slower than the regular Scourge Runner Chariot, but the damage output is exactly the same. Yeah, because this one here is a full second faster, but the damage is exactly the same. What it comes down to here is the poison attack. And I guess it depends on how much you value that. I do think it is a good unit overall, but I think its reduced firing rate can be a little bit of a problem. I guess it really just depends. Do you prefer poison, or do you want this one to dish out damage faster? Their damage overall output is exactly the same. Given the amount of ammunition and the damage that each shot does, it's exactly the same amount of damage overall. But this unit here will exhaust its ammunition quicker, so in a pinch situation when the enemy is rushing at you, that actually might be more useful. So in terms of where I'm going to put that, I do think it's a good unit, but I think it's exactly the same as the original in terms of its actual potential. Okay, then we've got the... where is it? Flying unit. Here it is. The Crows of Kane, which is a Harper unit. Alright, so this one here, let's have a look. In terms of combat stats, exactly the same. It does have Fear, which means it's immune to Fear, and it regenerates while in melee. Essentially has the Hunger, which is okay. Gives it a slight edge over regular Harpies because, you know, it will take, I guess, slightly less damage, and it's good when, I guess, running down units. You can regenerate your health a little bit, but because each entity doesn't have that much health, you can only regenerate ones that are alive. You can't revive the dead, so it's not that valuable. Generally speaking, regeneration is more useful on units that have higher survivability on a per entity basis. For example, single entities, unless you can revive the dead, like for example, like the undead can do. So the Crows of Kane, they are slightly better than the original, but mainly because of the fear effects. So they're not as much of a bitch as the regular Harpies, which are big time cowards. Okay, and then we've got the Chill of Sonta, which is a Hydra unit. Alright, so let's have a look at the difference here. In terms of combat stats, it's exactly the same. Most of the Regiment of Renown's combat stats are exactly the same. It comes down to this. It has Frostbite, so it reduces the speed of those that it attacks, which is, I guess, kind of useful if you're pursuing the enemy. It's not a particularly fast unit, so reducing speed might give it the edge against some slow cavalry units or fast infantry. And then it has Frost Breath, which, in my opinion, is pretty much identical to Fire Breath. It's just essentially just a reskin. Yeah, so I'm going to rate that exactly the same as Fire Breath. It all just comes down to this. I don't think it's that big of a deal. It's a good unit, don't get me wrong, but I'd say it's just about as useful as a Hydra unit. It just depends on how much you value the Frostbite. This isn't the sort of unit that is super quick that should be used as running down enemy units. So typically speaking, if you're already locked in melee, having the reduced speed does not reduce combat stats at all. It just helps if you want to run the enemy down, which is not that useful all the time. So I'm just going to put that as same as the original, but you could put it on like the border between slightly better and original. It's up to you. Okay, and then the final one here is a Bloodrack Medusa. Where is it? There it is. It is the Siren of Red Ruin. Okay, so this one here, it actually has reduced missile strength, but that's probably just reduced reload time reduction. Let's have a look. So 5.9 compared to 6. Yeah, it's just a reload time reduction. That's negligible. I wouldn't make any difference on that. It's still got the same amount of damage output overall. And it has this ability here, the Wall of Malice. Now, this here is actually really good. It's like a Mortis Engine effect that lasts, a few seconds. It's good in a blob to dish out a lot of damage. So if you're in a big infantry fight, this will give us a pretty big edge over the regular Bloodrack Medusa. You do have to remember to actually click it, not passive. But it's essentially like a Flock of Doom that you can use twice, for, essentially for free. So I'm going to put this one as better than the original because that ability there is quite damaging, but that's about it in terms of the Dark Elf one. Okay, now we move on to Lizardmen Regiment of Renown, starting with the Red Crested Skink unit. Where is it? The Cohort of Sotek. So probably the same. Oh no, it's the same combat stats. The reason why it's got higher leadership is because it's unbreakable. Okay, but it also has this ability here, Refuse to Die. So this is actually very useful. You pop this down, and while that's active, entities cannot be killed. So it doesn't matter how much, they can still take damage, but they can't actually be killed. This is really useful if it's just about to get wrecked, and it's still got like 20, 30 models left, and you pop this down, and they'll just keep fighting for an additional 20 seconds, and then after that, they'll pretty much all die. Fairly useful. It's definitely better than the original. If you need this unit to hold the line, it can do it. It's a fairly squishy unit, though, in the first place. But the combination of Unbreakable and Refuse to Die is really handy. So I'm going to put this one here as better than the original. Okay, then we've got the Legion of Chakwa, I think. Yep. Which is a Saurus Spears with shield. It says Saurus Spears, but this unit here has a shield. So the game is lying to you. Okay, so its counterpart. It does have 15 extra armor. And then it also has this ability here, Shield of Chakwa, which you get 3 uses of it, which provides missile resistance plus 40% in an area. Now, these guys here already have shields, but the additional 40% missile resistance will reduce damage even further, obviously, from incoming missile attacks. Now, this unit here is fairly vulnerable to getting shot just because it's fairly slow. So as it's advancing onto, depends on what it's fighting, let's just say Skavens. Let's just say it's going up against Rattling Guns, right? So popping this ability down as you're charging into Rattling Guns can be really helpful to just mitigate some damage. So I'm going to put that one there as better than the original because missile resistance is definitely very helpful. Okay, then we've got the Temple Guard, which is called the Star Chamber Guardians. Alright, let's have a look here. So, in terms of combat stats, identical. They do have magic attack, and they've got Guardian, and they've got expert charge defense as opposed to charge defense versus large. So once again, magical attacks can be detrimental, especially with a unit that is slow and can't pick and choose its targets very easily. Having Guardian, that means that, I guess, if you want to make use of it, you got to put your heroes close to it, which can be useful. But the thing is, you can get Guardian on your hero units sometimes, so... And it doesn't stack. It's not like having 3 Guardians give you 45% physical resistance. That's not how it works. It can only be active once. So, it's okay. It's definitely... I'm going to put that as same as the original. It's just, none of that stuff is a big deal. In Warhammer 3, it'll probably be more along the line of slightly better or even better than the original, because magic attack is very useful, especially with the introduction of all these demons. But there's, in Warhammer 2, which is what we're basing this off at the moment, there's barely any, demonic units. You're far more likely to encounter massive magic resistance than physical resistance, so it's just not that useful. And since it doesn't have any additional combat stats, it's just the same as the other ones. Okay, then we've got the Umbral Tide. Let's have a look at that. Where is that? There it is. Which is a Salamander hunting pack. So this one here has 7 extra missile strength, but let me just see if it's reload time reduction. 8.4 compared to 8.9. Yeah, it's the same overall damage. They just shoot faster. Okay. They stalk, which is very useful. They have perfect vigor. And just like the other counterpart, they have primal instincts, which actually doesn't matter too much with this unit because typically speaking, this is a missile unit, and that will not trigger until it's actually taken some damage. So this unit here, if it's getting primal instinct, it's usually on its way out anyway. It's not a hit and run unit. It's got reasonable speed, but that's not its primary purpose. Its primary purpose is to dish out damage with its missile attack, which it's not boosted in any way. Except for having Stalk, being able to move it around to the enemy's flank can be quite useful, and having Perfect Vigor is also quite good. It's definitely better than the original, just by a little bit, so I'm going to say slightly better than the original there. Just not that big of a deal. Okay, then we've got the Cold One Spear Riders. Where are they? Probably looking right. There it is, up here. The Pok Hopak Cohort, which are Cold One Spear Riders. Alright, let's have a look. Same combat stats. This one here has Vanguard Deploy. And, hang on. And it doesn't have Primal Instincts, and it also has Immune to Psychology. Right. Okay, that is actually a big benefit not having the Primal Instincts there. So I'm going to put that one as better than the original. Because I really hate Primal Instincts. That's a very bad ability. So getting rid of that, especially with your cavalry units, that is very useful. And Vanguard Deploy for cavalry is very good. So yeah, that is a not far superior, but better. It's better than the original. Okay, then we've got a Teradon unit. The Powax Sentinels, which are regular Teradon riders. Alright, let's have a look here. So, it has physical resistance of 20%. Seems like it's got higher missile strength, but that might once again be reload time reduction. 4.2 as opposed to 4.4. Yep, 2713. 2713. Yeah, it's the same overall damage. I don't really value like 0.1 of a second of reload time reduction. It's not that big of a deal. Is that it? Is this a better... Drops of Sundering, I believe, are better than the regular... Yeah, it does have a better rock drop ability. So... Yeah, having physical resistance and that better rock drop is better, but it's not like it's a big deal. I'm going to put that as... It's kind of on the border between better than the original and slightly better, because physical resistance is definitely really good. Most missile attacks in the game are a physical attack, which is what it's going to be most vulnerable to. And those bombs are very useful. So, look, I'm going to put it under better than the original. It only just scraped it onto there. Okay, then we got some Ripidactyls here. The Colostodon Hunters. Alright, let's have a look what they do. So, we've got this ability here, which gives them... It's called Toad Rage. Gives them a 50% damage increase, but causes them to go Rampage, which I don't like. Also, there's a bonus versus large compared to bonus versus infantry. Let's have a look at the difference. So this one here, bonus versus infantry 15, bonus versus large 15. Right. So they're just different units. This one here can be very hit and miss. Like getting extra damage in can be really good, but what happens if you want to pull the unit out? Last 18 seconds. That's enough time to actually kill the unit entirely if you put it down the wrong time. So look, it's just a stat redistribution. I'm going to put that as same as the original, because I don't value any ability that causes you to go Rampage, especially with units that should be used to some degree as hit and run. That's not good. You don't want to be staying there in prolonged combat for long periods of time in an unfavorable engagement. Of course, you could always just not pop it down, but I just don't think it's very useful. Sometimes the temptation to use the ability is too ever-present. Okay, let's go down to, I think this is the Thunderous one. Yeah, the Thunderous one, which is an Ancient Stegodon. And let's have a look at it. So, in terms of combat stat, it has plus 42. That, once again, might be reload time reduction, but we'll check. 5.6 compared to 5.9. Yeah, that's likely just the reload time reduction. And other than that, same combat stats. It's just got this ability here. Judgment of Oxmac. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this stuff correctly. It's got 10 uses of it. Has a recharge rate of 20 seconds. And it basically pops down a bolt of lightning. This is okay. Yeah, it can actually hit your own units. So sometimes having the Thunderous one fighting out by itself can be better than having it among your own units. You got to be careful with it. So this one here can be hit and miss. You just got to be very careful with it. I'm going to put that as slightly better than the original, because that's the only thing that makes it different to a regular Ancient Stegodon. But yeah, you just got to be careful with it. Don't put it too much among your own units, or else you will lightning bolt them and you'll kill your own troops, which will actually make it worse than the original, which you don't want. But as long as you use it correctly, as in don't keep it near your infantry, you should be fine. Okay, then we got a Troglodon over here. The Pale Death, which, there we go, Feral Troglodon. Let's have a look at the difference. Once again, reduced missile strength. This one's actually got it higher. Let me have a look at it. 6 seconds compared to 5. Yeah, negligible. Okay, it's basically the same. Okay, both Rampage. They've got this ability here, the Primeval Roar. 24 melee attack in a 40-meter radius. Yep, that's good. That's a buff. And since melee attack is pretty high value for Lizardmen, that is a good ability. But apart from that, combat stats are exactly the same. But that is a pretty good ability, so I'm actually going to put that as better than the original. Because the Lizardmen, if fought well, they do tend to get into blobby situations with lots of single entities. And so popping that down on like 10 to 20 units can really increase your damage output. So that can be very handy. Keeping in your, Stegadon Doomstack or whatever it is you want to do. Even if you're not doing that and you've got a bunch of melee infantry, that can still be very useful. So that's a good ability. Okay, then we've got a Carnosaur here. Where is that? There it is. Getblom's Terror. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. So, that one. Let's have a look. So this one can hide, but it doesn't stalk, it just can hide. So that's interesting. It's got Vanguard Deploy. It doesn't have Rampage. That's a big benefit. Combat stats are exactly the same, and it has Strider. That is actually far superior to a Feral Carnosaur. Like, Feral Carnosaurs are good, right? But not having Rampage, I can't tell you how many times I'm using Feral Carnosaurs, right? And they go Rampage, and I'm like, no, you fucking idiot, and I have to go use Cold-Blooded. So having a unit that you just don't have to worry about with that, and being able to hide it in forest, that's a big deal. You might be able to use it to sneak up on the enemy. I'm going to put that as far superior to the original, because that has way more tactical application than a Feral Carnosaur, so that's really good. And then finally, we've got the Coatl, which is, I gotta find it, there it is, the Spirit of Tepok. So, we've got, okay, same combat stats. This is the same sort of situation that we had with the Doomfire Warlocks, where they've got two different abilities. So, with Coatls, you've got 2 uses of Uranus Thunderbolt, and 1 lesser Chain Lightning. Then with Spirit of Tepok, you have 2 uses of Shield of Thorns, and 1 lesser Banishment. It just depends on what you value more. Now, typically speaking, a Banishment spell is better than Chain Lightning, but only by a tiny bit. Now, Uranus Thunderbolt, I would actually value that maybe a little bit higher than Shield of Thorns. But then again, if you're using this unit in a blob, that physical resistance can be more useful. So I'd say that its abilities are slightly better than the original. Yeah, just slightly better than the original. Because Banishment will typically do more damage, and Shield of Thorns is probably a bit more useful than Uranus Thunderbolt. Alright, well there we go. That's the tier list there. We got a few units up in the far superior. At least we got 1 for every single faction. That's really important. And we only have 2 units that are worse than the original, and a few units that are same as the original. Typically speaking, most Regiment of Renown tend to gravitate towards slightly better than the original, and hopefully I didn't miss anything this time. I tried to be a little bit more thorough than I was in the previous one, because I totally missed the Sterling's Revenge stuff, and that was bloody obvious, so just try not to have another one. But if I did miss anything, feel free to let me know in the comments, because we've still got, I think, 2 more of these videos to do. Next time we cover the Skaven, the Tomb Kings, and the Vampire Coast, the other Game 2 races. The reason why I'm leaving the DLC for Game 1 races is because I want to include the Regiment of Renown for the Warriors of Chaos that are coming into this list, which is a bit weird because those will be the only Warhammer 3 Regiment of Renown that I've covered, but we'll see how we go. Anyway, that's the end of this one here, guys. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to check out Instant Gaming and check out Stellaris if you haven't already. You'll easily lose a couple hundred hours by playing that game. It's a lot of fun, if you like those kind of games. Appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next time, fuckers. Bye.